Welcome back to the Venari Podcast. I'm Gov Candola, and we're joined for our 8th and final episode of the Sustainability Series with Virginia Alzina. Now, Virginia is the Chief Sustainability Officer at EmergeVest. Virginia, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Gov.
No, I really appreciate you being on. And today's an interesting one because we're looking at things from a slightly different angle. And that is from the perspective of an investment firm rather than just the company who are making the adjustments. But I suppose to kick us off, do you mind giving our listeners a bit of an insight to who EmergeVest are?
Sure. EmergeVest, it's a global investment firm that was formed in 2013 with assets under management of 850 million. And we seek to build great business by generating value for all our stakeholders. We operate cross-border, mid-market growth buyouts in the sector of logistics, global supply chain, technology, but also mostly for the logistics sectors and some also in the financial service. And the total transaction value that we have is about $2 billion US. We have offices in Hong Kong, Singapore, and London. And we are very operationally focused, which means we have a value creation playbook and system called EVOS. And once we buy the companies and the portfolio companies, we go hands-on to create value and change.
Definitely. And you've had a very interesting career, I think, spending time at the UN and working in Myanmar. What made you, I suppose, want to focus in this space, and how did you end up at EmergeVest?
It's been a long journey. It started over 28 years ago, and I've been across 5 continents.
Wow.
It all started by chance. I got an internship opportunity at the United Nations headquarters in New York, and that's where I learned about the UN Environment Program, which it's an agency of the UN that deals with environment, sustainability, and environmental protection. So it sparked my curiosity of all the sectors and areas they were working on. So I decided to stay in the US, pursue a master's degree in environmental sciences, and then a PhD in environmental engineering and pollution control. And that's how I ended up staying in the US for 9 years, working at a multilateral financial institution called Inter-American Development Bank. So my role as an environmental protection specialist was to make sure all the loans and infrastructure projects had no serious environmental and social impacts. And then I moved to the MENA region as the director of a UN Center on Sustainable Production for the 21 sectors of the Mediterranean countries. So that there I spent 5 years. Until then, I moved to the private sector to Asia. And I spent a few years in Hong Kong, and then 7 years in Myanmar working as group director of sustainability of 2 holding companies listed in the Singapore Stock Exchange, but had the headquarters in Yangon, Myanmar. And when COVID happened, unfortunately, there was a coup d'etat on the 1st of February of 21. And I could no longer work in Myanmar and Yangon because of the coup. So that's when I joined EmergeVest, which was, as I said, this private equity fund based in Hong Kong. Its values and mine align perfectly, and sustainability and trying to improve companies and improve the ESG aspects of it.
Amazing. Yeah, I was going to say that's an incredible career, and in terms of where it's taken you to all parts of the globe. I suppose focusing on EmergeVest, and I really wanted to kind of deep dive into, I suppose, what is responsible investing, and I suppose EmergeVest's approach to it. Do you mind giving us a bit of an insight to that?
Yes, sure. The responsible investment is not a new concept. The UN already in 2005 decided jointly with some other institutions and institutional investors to create some guidelines on what responsible investment was, and created 6 principles for any fund, asset manager, or institution that wants to do responsible investment. So the principles are very straightforward. Means that to analyze and introduce ESG, environment, social, and governance issue into the investment analysis and decision making. So before you buy a company, try to analyze from the ESG perspective and point of view, if it makes sense, what is the opportunities and the risks. Once you buy the company, principle number 2 is to actively be owners of the ESG and introduce them as well as your portfolio company in both policies and the day-to-day practices. Principle number 3, to seek disclosure. Request your portfolio companies to disclose with an environmental sustainability report what are the advancement in ESG issues. In all the companies where an asset manager invests, they should seek this data and the reporting on ESG issues advancement. Also, to promote acceptance of the principles among peers and also among the investment industry. That's principle number 4. Principle number 5, work together to enhance effectiveness implementing the principles. So the UNPRI has a platform where all the signatories of the principles of responsible investment jointly collaborate to endorse and enhance those implementing the principle, our work together. And last one, the principle number 6 is we commit ourselves to report on the activities and the progress implementing the principles. And the way EmergeVest is engaging in responsible investment is, well, as my function of managing director, I conduct due diligence and analyze each company before we invest in it from the point of view of ESG, both if it has potential risks or which are the potential opportunities that we could, once we get hands-on, improve to contribute, for example, to any of the sustainable development goals. Once we purchase the company, we buy, we invest in the portfolio companies, we become active owners. So we start implementing policies on ESG and practices. For example, in our portfolio companies in the logistics sector, we implement health and safety policies, D&I, diversity, equity, and inclusion, net zero. How are we going to do to reduce greenhouse gas emissions? How are we going to protect data privacy and security? Any topic that is material for a logistic company, in this case. So we prepare policies in those material topics and implement initiatives and start measuring our progress. We also ask our portfolio companies to report annually, and we get external assurance for our greenhouse gas emissions data, as well as for the sustainability reports. We also collaborate with other industries, association, asset managers. We also, at COP26 in Glasgow, we endorse, both as EmergeVest and EV Cargo, a memorandum of understanding to reduce emissions of the road transport. It's called the Memorandum of Understanding on Zero Emissions Mid and Heavy Vehicles, and it was signed between countries, industry association, companies, investors, and has as an objective to get 30% of sales or purchases of mid and heavy vehicles, can be buses, trucks, or anything, 30% net zero or zero emissions by 2030 and 100% by 2040. Those are ambitious very ambitious standards. We also attend COPs, the Conference of the Parties on Climate Change, and present on our cases how we manage to reduce emissions and support others in this journey. And as well as EmergeVest, we also report on these principles for responsible investment under the UN PRI. And recently we got an award for that last November as the Responsible Investment Award for Private Equity of all Asia. So we are
That's
very
amazing.
proud of this last achievement.
That's certainly an award you want to be winning in terms of the industry and the role that you play as well. I was going to say, with net zero on the topic, what steps have EmergeVest, I suppose, taken to help their portfolio companies transition to a low carbon economy?
Yes, we believe for the logistics sector and the transport sector that it's hard to abate sector, and it's such an important sector contributing to climate change that our mission is to support portfolio companies in this sector to become net zero and to transition to a low carbon economy, because otherwise we wouldn't be in business in the next year. So the way how we've done to support them is it's been a long journey. In the last 3 years, we worked very hard, but we've achieved impressive results. The first step was to account for all these CO2 emissions. And as you know, there are emissions that are direct emissions, the ones directly from fuel consumption, and that we have a fleet of trucks in the UK, and most of our Scope 1 emissions, direct emissions, come from that fleet. But we also have 80 offices around in 25 countries. So we also have Scope 2 emissions, which is these indirect emissions from electricity purchases, and a big impact on Scope 3 emissions, which is all the indirect emissions that come from all these cargo movements that we are paid for by our clients to move cargo from all over the world. But we managed to account for 2021 and got this as our baseline. Once we got our baseline, you know that what gets measured gets managed. So
Yes.
once we got our baseline CO2 footprint in 2021, every month, every quarter, we manage how much we manage to reduce emissions. So we introduce board reports and reports to the sustainability committee of the business regularly. So they are ingrained and they understand that this is a goal for all the company, and everybody is in charge as well and responsible for getting those emissions reductions. We also got science-based target initiative approval, which is the agency that certifies that your emissions reductions are fast enough and meaningful enough to get into or be on top of the Paris Agreement and 1.5 degree Celsius heating, not on top. So that's also another very important milestone that we've achieved. And then we created the net zero targets based on the science-based target initiatives. We know that if we want to reduce almost 0.5% of our emissions by 2030, how much we need to reduce per year at Scope 1, Scope 2, and a little less ambitious target is for Scope 3 because it's our indirect emissions. But then now that we have all these governance framework on, we also went into the more details. I'm sure you want to know how we reduce the Scope 1 emissions,
Yeah.
and then Scope 1 emissions, because most of our emissions come from the fleet, we had to switch to biodiesel
Hmm.
which has a big potential of reducing CO2 emissions. So we switch almost 2 million of liters of diesel to an HVO, which had a big impact on reducing our scope 1 emissions. We also introduced measures and had a program for fewer miles, friendlier miles. We upgraded we upgraded diesel trucks. We electrify some of our fleet and a lot of our forklifts and machinery. But also another thing, we introduce ESG metrics as a
Okay.
bonus for our managers. So they know in their performance review that if they contribute to reducing emissions, they also get a percentage of their bonus is tied to this
Ah,
to these metrics. So that also
interesting.
incentivizes the management into getting this important milestones part of them. So yes, and I have to say as well that last year we got an award as well for being the best sustainable logistic company in the UK. We got
Wow.
recently awarded because of all, not only about the sustainable, this mitigation of climate change and reduction of CO2 emissions, but also by conducting a holistic approach to sustainability, taking care as well of our employees, our health and safety, improving women at the management level of the company, and having most of the indicators and the material topics covered under the sustainability strategy of the company.
Now, your role is different to most as you wear two hats, working as an MD for EmergeVest, but then also as the CSO for their biggest portfolio company, EV Cargo. How do the two roles, I suppose, differ? And how do you manage the challenges of doing both?
Yes, it's a lot of work because as you said, it's two different hats, two different roles. We report differently to the UN principle of responsible investment as an asset manager and private equity fund, and we have different reporting standards as a company, as an EV Cargo, as a logistic company. Same with the materiality, the topics that are key as responsible investment of a fund or a logistics company are very different. Also, there are differences in how do you reduce emissions of a fund, because we don't have a scope 1 emissions, we do have a scope 2, and we have a scope 3 emissions, but they are different than the ones that a logistics company has, that has a lot of scope 1 emissions because we burn fossil fuels so it's quite different. But at the same time, there are a lot of synergies because both EmergeVest and EV Cargo are focused on mostly the logistics and supply chain industries. So this is where the synergies are, and I would say that the best way how I manage both is by having time management and try to allocate my time rigorously to what can be done at EmergeVest and EV Cargo, collaborating with peers, especially at EV Cargo that has 3,000 employees. So I can delegate some of the functions and try to get some other colleagues to help me calculate data or implement policies and take initiatives, especially on health and safety or diversity and data privacy and security, and having a deep understanding on what are the priorities of each one of the both organizations.
That's incredible. Well, look, it's been fascinating, obviously, learning more. And obviously, this episode was unique, obviously, looking at it from an investment firm's perspective. So thank you, Virginia. I really appreciate you taking time out of your schedule to speak with us.
Thank you, Gov. It was a pleasure.
Thank you.